everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with Walt Boyes, who is a futurist. I didn't know that there actually were futurists in the real world until I met Walt. Actually, I think we met talking about nanotechnology at a conference. So he knows a lot about a lot of different things, and today he's going to share a little bit about what he thinks will be happening, say, in the future if you want to have a job. So Walt, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. What everybody needs to realize is that our society globally is in a higher degree of flux than society has ever been. Certainly since the Volkswanderung of the early Dark Ages, when civilizations were falling left and right. And what's happening now is that everything's fluid. So if you are older, say older than 40, or you are young, say younger than 25, pay attention, because you're gonna have problems. One of the things that has been happening in manufacturing for the last 25 years is that catastrophes and economic collapses have delayed the leaving of the boomer generation from the workforce. And the problem is the boomers know everything about how to make stuff. Most of the boomers started before automation. And so they went to work having to know how to do everything rather than how to push a button. And so they knew, for example, how to turn a valve, how to watch a pressure gauge, and do all of those things, where now somebody sits in a control room and looks at values on a screen and hits a key. It's very divorced from the way things are actually built. And this is a problem because all that institutional knowledge that is crammed into the heads of the boomers like me is going away, and they can't get it back. People have been trying for 10 or 15 years now to interview boomers, interview senior mechanics and engineers with 30 years experience, and try and get all this stuff out of their heads. The problem is that people don't know what they know. They have no idea what is up there. They just know that if X, oh, that's right, I do this. Or, no, you don't want to do that. We tried that in 1957. And it didn't work then, and it's not going to work now. So if you were in that 40 to 60, 70 year age group, I wouldn't be quick to retire, because you can probably, or if you do retire, make sure that they know that you're available to come back as a contract employee. I have a really good friend who worked for one of the major energy companies for 25 years. He retired. When he retired, he was making the equivalent of $25 an hour. They didn't know how to do this one evolution at the refinery, because the last time they did it was 10 years before, and nobody knew how to do it. And they needed to do it desperately, because if they didn't do it real soon, the refinery was going to blow up. So you got a phone call. and they said, we'll pay you $250 an hour as a contractor to come back and teach us what we need to know. And he's been working for $250 an hour ever since. So if you're that kind of person and you have that kind of institutional knowledge, hold your hand out and they'll put money in it. Now, if you are a younger person, when my father left high school, because he didn't graduate, in 1938, he got a job as a necktie salesman for McKesson. It was McKesson Robbins then, which is a drug company. He was a detail man, and he could do that with not a whole lot more than an 8th grade education. Then he got a job with a company called Brown Instrument, which is now better known as Honeywell. And he became a senior sales rep for them. And then he got a job with a little company called Lockheed at a little place called the Skunk Works, where he became one of the shift supervisors on the P-38 program, all with about a 9th grade education. Eventually, Lockheed said, the government says that you can't be a supervisor unless you have a high school diploma. So here's the paperwork, go take your GED test. And he did, and he passed. And that was all the education my father had. And he had a perfectly good, very long career as an industrial engineer. They wouldn't certify him as an industrial engineer, of course, because he didn't have a college degree. But the point of this is that when you were done with the 8th grade, unless you wanted to go on to specialized instruction, you were done. You could farm a farm, work in a factory, do all of these things because the education system was set up to do that. The education system was set up to deliver 8th grade education people to trade schools, to high schools, to and to college preparatory courses. What's happened since then, and the information has been very, very tightly packed. What's happened since then is that education has become more diffuse. You don't have to learn as much in every year because everybody's going to go to college and everybody's going to get a college degree. And what the truth is that your bachelor's degree now is your ticket to entry, like your high school diploma used to be, and like back in the 1930s, your 8th grade diploma used to be. And so people in the age group of, well, call it 12 to 25, really, have to seriously look at what they want to do from the point of view of what occupations that they can do that are still going to be available. Fundamentally, they break down into two broad areas. One is intellectual endeavor, programming, writing, law, doctors, medicine, and so forth. That's over here. The other, which is far larger in terms of the number of people, is mechanical, and for all intents and purposes, everything from ditch digging to being a plant operator in an oil refinery. Things that you have to have specialized skill, mostly with your hands, to be able to do. Now, automation has reduced the number of those people considerably, to the point where you don't need 5,000 people to run an oil refinery anymore. You need about 300, but you still need 300. And the average age of people running oil refineries is about 50 right now. So if you think you might like to work in that environment, please do. Remember, however, that oil refineries are not going to expand very much. We're going to go back to using oil for what the gods intended, which is to make plastic instead of burning it in the exhausts of cars. Granted, I will give up my Porsche when they pry the keys out of my cold, dead fingers, but otherwise I'm a very big proponent of electric vehicles, because that's coming. That's almost all of the major automobile producers are producing electric vehicles. I just saw one yesterday that I'd never seen before. I saw a Toyota powered by Tesla. It's an e-vehicle. It's a Toyota e-vehicle. It's not a hybrid. It's a plug-in, and it's got Tesla under the hood. So this kind of stuff is coming. It's happening. It is not an accident that prior to the pandemic, as President Biden is happy to point out, the two most heavily sought for job categories were solar power technician and wind turbine technician. I don't think you have much of a future as a coal miner, frankly. Although coal may continue to be mined for the same reason that we continue to pump oil out of the ground, which is to make plastic. And coal, of course, makes dyes, aniline dyes. So if you're a young person, you need to think about whether you want to do intellectual pursuits. Programming is probably the most common, or whether you want to be a doctor. But here's the thing. Medicine is flattening out. It used to have a hierarchy of people. There was a doctor, and then there was the RN, and then there was the LVN and the LPN. And about 20 years ago, they made a new position up where RNs could get more training and become physician's assistants. And what's happening right now is there's a shortage of doctors, mainly because it costs $400,000 to become a doctor. And so lots of people are seeing a physician's assistant as their primary provider of medicine. I do myself. In fact, I see two of them. My endocrinology specialist that works on diabetes for me is also a physician's assistant. Basically, she's a doctor, but she can't call herself one. So doctors are flattening. RNs are, it's also getting very expensive to become an RN. So people are doing the licensed practical nurses and licensed vocational nurses. And the RNs are staff that manage the lower level nurses, the ones who actually do all the real nursing. And this bothers the heck out of a lot of nurses because they would much rather do nursing. The other thing that's happening in medicine is men are working their way into what were at one time traditionally women's roles in medicine: lab technicians, pharmacists, nurses, registered nurses. I know 4 people who are good friends of mine who are RNs, and they are male. The reason for that is they got out of the military with corpsman training. They had medic training in the military, and they decided that they'd like to pursue that, but by then they were basically too old to get into a medical school. The other kind of medicine that's growing like crazy are dentistry and veterinary medicine. It is harder to get into a vet school than it is to get into a medical school. It's easier to get into Harvard Medical School than it is to get into the University of Wisconsin Veterinary Medical School. Harvard takes more people in and has looser standards than UW does. So if you're looking for that kind of job, you might want to. And if you are a programmer, you need to start seriously looking about concentrating on cybersecurity as your forte. Unfortunately,
thing in the future is the cybersecurity is just going to explode.
Well, it already has exploded. The problem is that we're riding the blast wave still. The fact that the Russians were able to infect a piece of software that is commonly used to monitor networks, because networks are so complex now that you have to be able to see what's going on in them. So there's a dozen people who make network visualization software. I used to have one as a client. And what they were able to do is to go out and look at all the things on the network, bring back and build you a map of the network. And then in real time, it would show you which were working correctly and which were not. And very often it would show you devices that were on the network that you didn't know were on the network and you didn't want to be on the network and didn't belong to you. Well, what the Russians did was they inserted a back door into one of the most commonly used network visualization software that would allow them to do all the looking and all the hooking up of devices and make them so that you could not see them. That's one of the things that's happening, that network security is a real serious crying need. And worse, it's network security in industrial automation, because industrial automation systems were designed to be open. Their architectures were designed to be really open so that you could add things, take things away. The programmable controller was developed to keep General Motors from having to tear out all the relays and put new relays in. It would just mimic the relays the way you wanted them. So that's how it started. And it was always open. It was always unprotected. And now there's only a couple of companies that have really built protection, cybersecurity in from the plug that plugs into the wall all the way out to the machines. And friend of mine, who's one of the leading experts in cybersecurity in the industrial environment, and I sat down about 15 years ago and tried to figure out how many people in the world were competent at industrial cybersecurity. That's how many we found, not including us. 5. And all of them lived in North America. There's a lot more now, but it's still a crying need. And then there's this other problem. It's called the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things was designed so that your refrigerator could tell you that your milk has gone sour. Well, the problem is that it also tells anybody else that happens to have the ability to listen. It tells it has the ability to read off to your insurance company what you're eating. Your washing machine can do the same things. The Internet of Things is great, except when it's spying on you. And I'm not being paranoid.
A few years ago, where people wanted to know where the data was going when their TVs listened to them, because your TV has to be listening so it knows when you say turn on or whatever. So it's never not listening, but where is that data going? And they lost the court case, and so no one has to say, so you never know who's getting that data.
Well, I can tell you right now where it's going, at least at first, is to the company that made the TV. And from there, lots of other places, I think. Probably places that are not all that happy with the United States. There was a case, I don't know if you remember, there was a case where 2 scientists took a Jeep that had Wi-Fi and an automated control system that did things like monitor oil pressure, tire pressure, and so forth and so on. And they took it out on I-70 west of St. Louis, and had some guy driving around in it, and they took it over from another car and had him drive it into a ditch. And he couldn't do anything about it. Now, most modern cars have systems like that, even if they don't have auto driving characteristics. If your car has, for example, powered lane assist and things like that, you've got to be careful for that. There will be enormous numbers of Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and programmers needed in the next 20 years. The problem that people have to worry about, though, is that those jobs tend to max out in a salary range, unless you become a supervisor. If you become a supervisor, then you're not programming anymore. If you become a manager, you're not programming anymore. I have a good friend who just retired from Intel a year or so ago, and he didn't do programming after the first 5 years he was there. He was there for 35 years, I think, because they found out that he was an excellent manager, so they made him a manager. It's like being editor-in-chief of a major publishing house. You don't get to do as much editing as you would like to do because you don't have time. You're too busy managing. So we've got this dichotomy of jobs that are going to be here and jobs that are going to go away. basically any job that can be easily automated, up to and including jobs like many jobs that paralegals do, jobs that diagnosticians do.
Well, even surgeons and
Oh yeah, there are 3 or 4 different kinds of surgical robots, and basically what the surgeon does is he puts on a very, very intelligent looking face and pushes the button, and the surgeon does the job. And the reason for that is the robot is better as a surgeon than the surgeon is, unless they run into trouble. And that's several years ago, I think it was about 6 years ago, I got an opportunity to visit the Audi automobile plant in Ingolstadt, Germany. It's the top of the line Audi plant. They have 2 sections. They have the section where they bash all the metal to make fenders and all of that stuff. And then they have the assembly plant. The metal fabrication plant is lights out. There are no people normally in that plant. And that was 6 years ago. On the other side is very heavily automated, except for the people who do final assembly and fit and finish, because the robots are not quite good enough to do those things yet. But eventually the robots will be doing all of those things. If you're working with your hands, or you're working, I refuse to say manual labor because it has such a pejorative connotation. If you're working with your hands more and with what you have been trained to do, you have to find something that cannot easily be automated. There are a lot of those jobs. They're out there. Believe it or not, many of them are in the food service industries. People don't like food that's dished up by a robot. Every so often, one of the McDonald's franchisees somewhere decides that he's going to get rid of all of these minimum wage troublemakers, and he puts in a robot hamburger slinger. They don't last. I do not know of one that has completely replaced all of the hamburger slingers. Problem, of course, is that hamburger slingers make minimum wage, when clearly they probably should make much more than minimum wage. The concept of minimum wage, I think, is going to get a real shakeout. Chefs, if you like to cook, that's a job that's not going to be automated, because people want to eat food that was prepared for them by a person. Even some things are coming back out of automation. There is a very large transmission plant that Toyota owns in Tokyo, where they went in as an experiment and took all the automation back out. It turned out that with the increases in manufacturing knowledge and the increases in ability to control things, human beings could make all the transmissions they needed without automation. And the transmissions had a much lower failure rate on test. I don't know if that plant is still unautomated. This was several years ago, but it's interesting that that's true. And any of the occupations that has to do with artistry, those are not going to be automated out. Being a potter, being any number of things. I imagine somebody's going to come along eventually with a roofing robot, but I don't think that it's going to be soon, and I don't think it's because the kind of money you have to put into a robot, you can hire Joe down on the street corner to go up and nail shingles on a roof for a couple $100,000 times less. So if you are in the 45 range and older, though, one of the problems is the automation of resume hunting. You cannot simply mail your resume to the hiring manager anymore. The way you get a job like that is you have somebody hand carry your resume in, or you know the guy or the woman, and you call them up and say, "Hey, I'm looking for something new. Can I come over and talk to you?" And you go around the personnel management system. Otherwise, you have to have all the right keywords in your resume because that's what they look for. This new job producing company, Indeed, that's how they do it. And they charge you a couple $100 to send you a list of the competent people. I, for many years, worked with a headhunter, both to find me people and to find me new jobs. And what he knew, and what his daughter, who is now doing his company, what they know cannot be automated. Just like the old guy in the water treatment plant who's been there 9,700 years and knows what color paint those valves came in first, can't be automated. You just can't automate that level of institutional experience and knowledge. The problem is that we have a whole section of the demographics of workers who don't have all that institutional knowledge because they've been hopping from job to job to job. They've gotten laid off. They look for a better job. They've gotten laid off, and they haven't stayed someplace for 25 years where they have all that institutional knowledge. And if they have, sometimes they're in a situation where you can be so closely focused on your job that you're not following your field. I used to write an advice to the job warrant column for a major automation website, and I would get letters, and I would get sad letters. I got one time from a guy who said that he had worked for giant aerospace company R for 37 years, and they just told him that they were laying him off and they weren't going to give him much of a retirement package. And he wanted to know what he could do. And I said, there's really, if you have not been to school to improve and extend your capabilities as an engineer, and you haven't been taking classes, there's only one thing to do, and that's to put on that blue vest with the orange piping and practice handing out shopping carts. So this is also a pitch for lifetime learning. Keep learning, keep practicing, and above all, keep reading. Read the journals, read science fiction, read thrillers. So that's what's coming. And if you want to be a doctor, be a pandemic, be a pandemic investigator. Because as a futurist, I'm here to tell you this is not the last one. One of the first times that I ever took Joy Ward out before we got serious about it, each other, I took her to see Contagion. And by the time that movie was over, I was terrified. And I wasn't far wrong, because the story of Contagion, if you'll remember, is the wet market in a Chinese town puts out a disease vector, and it winds up killing half of humanity. We still don't know if Captain Trips is out there somewhere. And what we do know is that almost every place in the world is 8 to 12 hours away from any place else. Think about how fast you can get from interior China to the United States. You take a flight from Wuhan. Take a flight from Wuhan to Beijing or to Shanghai. You take a direct flight from Shanghai to New York or Chicago, and you're here. And it was 12 hours ago that you left Wuhan, elapsed time. And you can be shedding viruses like crazy and still not be feeling bad. There is no way to defend against that except by closing borders. And nobody in his right mind wants to do that. There's too many reasons to open the borders and let as many people as want to come in. The guy that invented the programmable controller was a very good friend of mine by the name of Dick Morley. Dick said that the way he would run immigration was at all the border crossings, north and south, he would put a big old gray Army surplus desk. And he'd hire a guy whose job was to smoke cigars and ask 3 questions. Question number 1, do you have enough money to live in the United States for 30 days? Or do you have someone who can put you up? Second question, do you have any skills? If you have skills on this list, that's great. Third question, do you feel sick? Have you been ill recently? And if the answer to all of those questions was satisfactory, you say, come right in. The hiring managers are right there.
All right. Well, that was a look at what it might look like in the future and the kind of jobs you might want to be looking at, or how to keep your job if you have one where you need to continue your education and do a lifetime of learning. So keep those things in mind. Remember, if you like this video, to hit like and subscribe, share it around, and hit that bell notification so you know when I put up more videos. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.